talking about students at Hispanic-Serving Institutions in Texas and New Mexico. This is also a project that was funded by the National Science Foundation. So again, what I'm going to say is not the opinion of the National Science Foundation. It is the information that is being put forward by the project team. Background for this information and the need for it, as Dr. Flores has alluded to, Hispanics are the largest minority group in the United States, but many people don't know that they're also the youngest minority group. They have the lowest median age, and they are only behind Asians in terms of the numbers of individuals that are the increases in size and growth, so that, and the Asian population is quite small comparatively. So in real numbers, the Hispanics also have the largest growth rate in the United States. And this is represented in schools, certainly in the Southwest, but this sample is from Texas and New Mexico. And in Texas, over 52% of the students in the public schools and over 60% of the students in the New Mexico public schools identify as Hispanic. But Hispanics are, as I have said in another presentation, underrepresented in many professions in the United States that require college degrees, especially in STEM fields. Now, HSIs are important to understand because HSIs, many people don't know this as well, but HSIs educate nearly 2/3 of the Hispanic college students in the United States. Many HSIs have very limited programming to support the Hispanic students, which is really counterintuitive. And also at HSIs, you cannot assume that their employees have an understanding of the background, experiences, preference, and culture of their Hispanic students. And our research across the last 3 years has shown that this is in fact the case. So understanding what the background experience of the students at HSIs is very, very important to helping folks who work at HSIs, but also in helping the advancement of those students. So what we did was a sequential exploratory mixed methods investigation. We began with literature review, then we completed focus groups at the Consejos Colectivos conference in Dallas, Texas. From there, we identified groups that were underrepresented in our focus groups and completed targeted interviews with students, faculty, administrators, and advocates. We took all of that information and did qualitative analysis of it, and then used it to construct and administer 2 surveys in the spring of 2018. One survey was for faculty, staff, and administrators, and the other was for students. And they were distributed to 119 HSIs in a 4-state region. In 2019, we revised the student survey based upon what we had learned in the first round, and then we deployed that survey at 1 regional comprehensive state university and 3 of its primary feeder community colleges. So to help you understand this timeline, in 2017, in December, we were awarded the grant. By the end of February, we were actually sponsoring a conference in Dallas where we did the initial qualitative investigation. In the 2 months between, we analyzed all of that information and created 2 surveys. So in this period, we did about an entire year's worth of work in 2 months. We got those surveys out in May and then caught our breath and redid this in 2019. So we have 2 samples, one from spring of 2018. We had over 550 responses, but 464 of them turned out to be usable. They ended up being from 14 HSIs in New Mexico and Texas, and you can see the distribution of those on the map. We also had sent this survey to HSIs in Colorado and Kansas. We had hoped to include Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana, but in 2018, there were no HSIs in those states. In spring of 2019, we did again a survey, and that survey was with 4 institutions. They're in the Texas Panhandle. We had over 950 responses. 829 of them turned out to be usable. And the result is that we have the only known regional survey of students at HSIs at this breadth and depth. And the reason I say at this breadth and depth is that We have almost 1,300 students involved in the sample when the two are combined, just short of that. And we asked on the first survey 33 questions, but many of them were multi-part and matrices. So for example, one of the questions had 10 prompts and there were 3 columns of responses. So that's one question asked literally 30 pieces of information. So on each survey, we gathered 150 or more approximately items of information. So I'm not aware of any other data set like this in the world. What we did to make sure that we got a good representation is that we did comparisons looking at the fact books from the various institutions. And so our gender distribution, ethnic distribution, and racial distribution matches that of the full population of students at these HSIs very well. Our sample also includes substantial counts of students from each year in college. And again, each sample meets at least a 95% level of confidence with a 5% margin of error. So here's some quick slides that will help you see how the gender and ethnicity stack up. And you'll note that these are the 2018 institutions, then the 2018 sample, then the 2019 institutions, and the 2019 sample. And for gender, you'll see they're almost exactly the same. For ethnicity, you'll probably note that we slightly oversampled Hispanics and slightly undersampled non-Hispanics on both of our surveys. And here's the representation of the race. There's almost a perfect overlay until you get to white individuals on the 2018 institutional data set. And the reason for that is that many of those institutions in 2018 had not allowed their students to select multiple racial identities. And so the white count is probably depressed there because it is very common for Hispanics to people who identify ethnically as Hispanic Latino to also identify racially as Hispanic and white or some sort of combination. And these are the charts that show our distribution across the years in college. You'll notice it's a very gentle curve in 2018. 2019 looks a little more condensed, but that's because we included an entire spectrum out to over 8 years, so that would spread out well as if we were to have done it in the same way. So the summary of the characteristics of the students at these HSIs is as follows. We found 2 very strong ethnic racial identities. There were only 2 groups that had median ratings on a 10-point scale of 10 and mode ratings of 10. So the middle point value was 10 and the most common value was 10. And those were for Hispanic Latinx individuals and white European American individuals. About 47% of all respondents identified with Hispanic culture. Approximately 18 or 19% of all respondents had English as their second language. But among Hispanics, that was 36.8%. 26% of the Hispanic Latinx parties stated that they were fluent in Spanish, and that was a rating of 10 on a scale of 1 to 10. But most of the Hispanic Latinx individuals had moderate to better proficiency in Spanish, so about 82% of them. Interestingly, approximately 5% of the non-Hispanics said that they had ESL standing as well. So Spanish remains a strong identifying characteristic in the population of Hispanic Latinx people in Texas and New Mexico. 50% of the respondents were first-generation college students, so that's for all of the respondents. 65% of the Hispanic Latinx individuals were first gen, while almost 40% of the non-Hispanics were. That difference is statistically significant at a moderately weak level, but we also found that Hispanic Latinx individuals were more likely with moderate effect to be the first in their family to complete a 4-year degree. And then we also had 7 ways in which the institution interacts with students, everything from instruction through the business office, counseling, mentoring, all of the most common forms. And what we found is that Hispanic students reported that the institutional representatives in all 7 forms of interaction did not understand their culture. So some pretty significant findings about the interchanges of ethnicity, language, and first-generation status for students at Hispanic-serving institutions, especially this point about culture, which seems incredibly counterintuitive until you begin to think about the history and development of HSIs, which we don't have time to go into. Key findings for age and residence is 84% of the students in our survey were in traditional college age, but interestingly enough, there were single, married, cohabiting, and divorced persons in every age group, including this young age group. We found the age of the students to be the only predictive indicator of credit course load, so the number of hours being taken, and the load was pretty much full-time as our average. 36.7% of the students lived on campus. The other 63 lived off campus. For those who were living off campus, approximately 35% lived with at least one parent. People who had reported having a child in the home, almost 92% of them were responsible for that child. And when we broke that down by age and gender and ethnicity, what we found is that 100% of the non-traditional age students were providing child care. So we're starting to see a little bit of separation for non-traditional students and a profile of them. They are they're likely to take fewer hours, and they're likely to have children in their home for whom they are responsible. We looked at employment. 69.4% of the informants were actively employed, which is pretty much the average for the last 30 years in the United States for college students. Most of that was off-campus work, and that was a statistically significant difference. Over 75% of the students were working part-time. We used 30 hours a week, which is the Affordable Care Act definition of part-time work as that definition. And what we found as significant differences were non-traditional age students were more likely to work and more likely to work more hours. And that students in New Mexico were more likely to work more hours. In 2019, we did a regression analysis with the data, looking at pretty much everything we could think of. And what we found is that age was a significant predictor for employment. So again, finding out some very interesting things related to the age of the students and what that means about their experiences, background, and activities while they're in college. In terms of paying for college, we listed 10 means of paying for college: Pell Grants, work study, scholarships, loans, etc., paying out of pocket. And for 2018, we found significantly that females were more likely to receive assistance from a spouse than males. Hispanics were significantly more likely to be reliant on Pell Grants and to be in work-study programs. Traditional age students were more likely to receive support from their family and to receive scholarships. Latino males were more likely than non-Hispanic males to be paying for college out of pocket. And we recognize differences by state. As I mentioned before, students in New Mexico showed some differences, and that was the case here. And those differences appear to be related to the economic conditions in the state. In 2019, we did a regression analysis, and again, we found a great number of things that it would really take me 20 or 30 minutes to unpack that one. So we're just going to say a great variety of stuff.
We have 1 minute, Dr. Peters.
Okay, so then what I'll have to tell you is we found out some very interesting things about locus of control and family expectations. Basically, Hispanic students have a higher internal and external locus of control at HSIs. That parallels Mexican-American culture, and the reason we use Mexican-American culture is the predominant form of Hispanic, Latinx culture in the in Texas and New Mexico is Mexican American, but that is not the case across the entire United States. Family support, we've got some very interesting findings, and then here's an entire list of things that we just simply cannot talk about. So we have more information about Hispanic students and can slice and dice it in more ways than literally anyone else in the world. And so I would encourage you to take a look at the paper that will be presented. And because we're out of time, I will stop there.
Thank you so much. I was so happy that you did this research. I look forward to reading it.
Well, you're more than welcome. It's an honor and a privilege to be involved in this.
Thank you.